Stage 5, radicalization or entropy, where the state either becomes increasingly radical, as did Nazi Germany, or slips into traditional authoritarian rule, as did fascist Italy. Now, I won't spend much time on this because we've already been here for like a couple of days, and we're also not at this stage. We're just sort of teetering, looking over at it, and it's hard to tell where things are going to go, or if we'll even get there, since many fascist movements dissolve before these stages. But, you know, we do already see the corruption, the cronyism, the protection of wealth, the president encouraging the police to be more violent with suspects, his cabinet being generals and unqualified billionaires related to the owners of private military companies. The White House recently released a plan to shrink the government, roll back regulation, consolidate departments, and privatize certain industries. But news dude, you say, why would a wannabe dictator want to make the government smaller, you ask? Oh wait, if the government is smaller, it's easier to control, you realize. And one of the few arguments that fascism can't take hold in America is because the government is too big, you reference. That's why it's called a consolidation of power, you conclude. And it would be disingenuous of me to not point out that previous presidents have contributed to the current amount of power able to be wielded by one dude. President von Hindenburg and his chancellors relied heavily on executive orders during the end of the Weimar Republic. Despite expanding the executive office in other ways, Barack Obama actually averaged the fewest executive orders since Grover Cleveland the first time. And Donald Trump so far has issued the most EOs since Jimmy Carter, who Congress made sell his peanut farm lest he make a profit off of his personal business while in the highest office in the land. And just some free word association, emoluments clause, impeachable, and get rid of them. And maybe don't let the president, who's under investigation and the subject of many lawsuits, to nominate a Supreme Court justice that may judge his fate, especially when that judge doesn't think the president should be burdened by investigations and lawsuits. These are ways in which an authoritarian might gain power. Also, purging voter rolls, making it harder to vote, upholding gerrymandering, having a campaign with active programs to suppress black voters, being a guy in charge of a country, and having an affinity for dictators, and joking a lot about going more than 2 terms. And oh, also, one of the only books he's read is a collection of Hitler's speeches. And speaking of speaking, Echo also notes that fascism uses newspeak, an elementary syntax to appeal to the masses. Sad. And speaking of sad, the last item on Brit's list is a disdain for human rights. Now, this is another element that's not unique to fascism or a requirement of it, but it's still important to note because fascism, especially in its later stages, reflects its charismatic leader, and a disdain for human rights applies to Donald Trump and America and his movement. It doesn't mean you want to, really want to commit some atrocities. It's a disdain for the existence of human rights that prevent you from committing certain atrocities in order to achieve your goal. It's why fascists dehumanize people to make the atrocities easier and more acceptable, justifying torture, calling for more executions, wanting to take out terrorists' families, and lamenting when strikes don't take out terrorists' families. One of Paxton's pre-election arguments that Trump isn't a fascist is that Trump isn't really expansionist like fascist movements. He's not invading countries right now. But he is okay with Putin annexing Crimea. He has vlogged about how we should help Libya on a humanitarian basis, and then as payment take half of their oil on a humanitarian basis. He's uncritically lauded America's past of taming an entire continent. You know, the genocide and expansionist stuff. So this disdain for human rights is about human rights not getting in the way. Just forcibly transfer an entire population. Just don't care about civilian casualties. Live and let live, you know? Justify bombing a hospital or school full of children in order to get to terrorists. Because there are no rules in war.
There aren't really rules to war. We can all intellectualize the rules to war, but there aren't really rules to war. There's no rules to war.
There are, actually. They're called war crimes. We have them to protect human rights. Like, let's say you want to deter foreigners from seeking asylum in your country. Maybe you'll make the conscious decision to institute a policy in which you forcibly separate children of all ages from their parents seeking asylum. And in some cases, deport the parents after the kid was shipped to Michigan. So in a case like that, Utah's largest newspaper might call it war crimes. So it's important to look at early signs that would bloom during stages 4 and 5, the stages that reasonable logic doers refer to when dismissing the existence of a fascist movement. This isn't fascism. Trump isn't a dictator currently, or imprisoning journalists, or his opponents right this moment, like his heroes do, and like his fans want him to do. But he has said he'd force the military to commit war crimes, and he still regularly calls for the locking up of many of his political opponents. And he does lie about and attack the press constantly. His Justice Department removed mention of freedom of the press from their manual. The president has labeled them the enemy of the people. There's a new bill introduced to suppress protesters called the Anti-Fascist Bill that even the editor of the National Review thinks goes too far. And a journalist who's reported on abuses by ICE and their collaboration with law enforcement was arrested wearing a press badge while covering a protest, and 2 days later the charges were dropped and he was given to ICE, who has detained him and are trying to deport him. Wow, what a clip that was from the show! Thanks for watching, and make sure to subscribe to this channel as well as our other channel where the full episodes are. It's called Some More News. This is called Some More News Clips, which you know because you just watched it. Anyway,